Hi,
Okay.
Allison.
Hi, Caroline.
You've just written an explainer of a major bill to overhaul the Federal Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which, of course, is much better known as No Child Left Behind. This bill is actually up for a hearing next Tuesday in the Senate. Is this the start of a serious push to reauthorize the law? Should folks around the country really start paying attention?
I think that's a great question, Caroline, and I think it's still an open question. As I'm sure many EWA members know, the administration just put out a package of what's called waivers that would give states wiggle room from key parts of the No Child Left Behind Act, including the deadline, requirements for teachers, requirements on sanctions for schools, in exchange for adopting certain reform priorities. So that process is already moving forward. So it's kind of, and moving forward much faster, than this piece of legislation. So a lot of that may already be in place, for schools around the country that EWA members cover before this legislation sort of makes it a prime time. Because remember, it will need to get through both the House and the Senate, and there is a lot of political opposition. So, it's important for, EWA members to continue focusing on the waiver package.
Right. But at the same time, looking a little longer term, as you said in your article, the bill would effectively reinvent the accountability system that's really at the heart of NCLB. Among other highlights, for example, it would completely scrap the famous AYP yardstick, or infamous, you might say, for measuring the performance of schools and districts. What would the new accountability regime look like?
We only have sort of a sketchy outline from the bill. There's a lot of unanswered questions that states would have to sort of fill in the blanks if this legislation were to come to fruition. We do know, though, from the legislation that there would be sort of an intensive focus on the lowest 5% of schools in terms of performance. There would be a sort of a set of strategies that the federal government would require states to try with them. And then states would have to come up with some sort of plan to address schools with persistent achievement gaps between more advantaged students and their peers that are either students in special education or students with limited English proficiency, students who are in the so-called subgroups that are measured now under the law.
That is really helpful. That's a really helpful primer. Just because our time's limited, give me a sense of who are the bill's biggest critics right now? What don't they like about it?
Right now, some of the biggest critics are civil rights groups, such as the Education Trust, the National Council of La Raza, and the National Center, folks who basically represent students with learning disabilities. And they're really concerned that this bill would basically back away from accountability for 90% of students, because as I mentioned, there's sort of a focus on the 5% lowest performing and the 5% of schools with the greatest achievement gaps. So that sort of leaves states to figure out what to do in the other 90% of schools. Yeah.
Very interesting. What does the Obama administration think of the bill?
Well, they sort of put out a statement that I thought was actually a little bit tepid, just saying that they, this is obviously a compromise, and they're glad to see reauthorization, moving forward for a long time, and it sort of had struggled to gain momentum. But they didn't really praise or strongly praise too many specific aspects of the bill. So, I don't know if they share the civil rights group's concerns sort of behind the scenes, or if they just really want the process to move forward.
Right. Of course, No Child Left Behind is the 800-pound gorilla of federal education policy, so any bill that's going to reauthorize it's going to be super long and complicated. But in a nutshell, if it were to go through at least some version of it, what do you think its greatest impact would be at the local level? And then we're just going to have to wrap it up.
No problem. I think that reporters should be sort of pressing folks in at the state and district level to see what they would do with this new running room that the bill gives them. As I said, the bill would allow states and districts to sort of decide what to do with the other sort of 90% of schools that don't fall into those two categories. And reporters should be asking, now that you have this flexibility, what will you be doing to make sure all students are succeeding?
Right. Great. Thank you so much, Alyson, and we'll be really watching for your coverage as this moves forward.
Thank you, Caroline.
Take care.
Thank you.